So how do we want to frame this out? How far back would you say? Because I know we can talk about the first Earth Day in 1971.
Mhm.
And that literally for 50 years, we've been trying to get on the Fed's radar and get them to pass legislation and funding to deal with climate and specifically to deal with it, environmental justice. And now the doors are open. Trump is gone. And how do we make sure that we take advantage of these opportunities, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the folks who have been doing the work, who have been carrying the burden, who have put their blood, sweat, and tears into trying to the best of their ability to save people, right? To save their communities, to at the same time save the planet, should be the
Mm.
ones who are being focused upon, both on the resource side of the equation, and also playing a significant role in framing out the legislation and the policies,
Mhm.
and also working with folks around the statutes that are going to be so necessary to make sure that we are addressing the climate crisis and the environmental injustices and the disinvestments at the same time.
Yeah, so that's a good way for us to frame this. So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. So we'll just do what we do. We'll just have it, you know, just tackle it free reign, okay?
Hmm.
We ride this horse bareback.
Well, that's the environmental justice way.
That's right. That's all we know, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
why don't we just start with the fact that, it's wonderful that we have billionaires who are now finding value in focusing on environmental justice and climate justice issues. Um, and understanding that we cannot win on climate change if we don't win on those components that I just touched upon. And in knowing that, with any basic equation that you might do, then that would also lead one to believe that those folks would also want to make significant investments in the organizations and individuals whom have the expertise, who have the resource, who have the relationships, and just need to build stronger sets of capacity and infrastructure to be able to expand that out and to help play a role in addressing the climate emergency and the systemic racism, which are both equally as deadly.
mhm. And that's a great point because I was on a call recently where we were wordsmithing a portion of a document and the word capacity came up. And some people pushed back against it and said, no, well, we don't really want to talk about capacity. Let's say building power. And I said, building power is too nebulous. What do we mean when we talk about building power? Are we talking about running more candidates? Or, with building capacity is a much better description because we're talking about building organizational capacity. We're talking about building staff capacity. We're talking about building capacity financially. And what we always say at New Alpha Community Development Corporation, we never call it economic development. We call it community economic development because we must also develop people and communities. But I'm 100% with you when you said that we have to look at giving that is actually investments in our communities. We have to move past what have been traditionally handouts.
Mhm.
And so, you give people $20,000, $50,000, $100,000. And at the end of the programming period, you're tapped out financially and you're right back at the door again of another philanthropic entity trying to get funding to not only keep going, keeping the program going, but also so you can keep the lights on so you can keep your staff paid, so you don't have to shut your doors. So investments are really what we need. Investments in community programs, community projects, entrepreneurial opportunities, and job development.
Mhm. And something, Rev, it's a blessing that I've been able to work at the highest levels in the federal government, work at the highest levels in nonprofits, work on Capitol Hill. So that gives you a certain ability to see the horizon, if you will, to be able to take a look out and also see where resources are going. And we have traditionally, financed a lot of organizations with millions upon millions of dollars that have not been able to achieve any more than the organizations that were receiving $20,000. So imagine if we flipped that paradigm, or made sure there was more equity in it, okay, and made sure that those organizations who've been getting to $20,000, struggling to get to $20,000, gave them a chance to actually have millions upon millions of dollars to do what they were able to do, even exponentially greater, when we began to actually properly finance folks. Because it comes down to the finance, right? The dollars. And if you don't have the dollars, then you're, as you said, you're always struggling. It is an uphill battle, and taking folks away from the work and the things that they do well. So if we build capacity inside of frontline organizations and others, then it just makes sense that we'll finally begin to win on these issues. And I'll just leave it at this, Rev, is that the model over the last 30 years has not worked, because we haven't got one major piece of climate legislation or environmental legislation passed in a long time. So evidently, we need to do something different. And we have to do something different because we're running out of time, because of the climate crisis. We're running out of time also because we haven't properly addressed the systemic racism issues that are out there. So we got a chance to operate from a 21st century paradigm now instead of a 20th century paradigm.
Absolutely. And you brought up a really good point, because when you look at the literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that have been spent, and often the organizations that have received these huge sums of money, and you look around in the very communities that they profess to be helping, environmental justice communities, communities with a legacy of poverty, and you look around and you say, where's the just transition? What can we point to on the ground, a tangible accomplishment? And there's really, there really aren't any. You'll see some things in place, but those are generally accomplishments that people have been able to cobble together with small pieces of funding around the country, and not belittling what they have done. But they've been able to take a little and get so much more. And I've always wondered about what the conversations are like in the room when you get these organizations that get tremendous amount of money, and they're talking with these large foundations, they're talking with these millionaires and billionaires. What are they telling these people, which leads them to believe that the only way that they can address the issues with their philanthropic dollars is to go through these middle people, these middle organizations? So I always feel as if that while they're advocating for us, they're also pointing out deficits that persuade people to say, hey, we won't give the money directly to the community, we'll give it to you. And to me, those are clear violations of both the principles of environmental justice and the Jimenez principles, because communities should be speaking for themselves, communities should be leading themselves. And if while everyone is saying, oh, either you're at the table or on the menu, why are we not invited to be at the table for these discussions where we have huge amounts of philanthropic dollars or plans being put forth to the federal government? why are we not invited in the room with these people who are supposed to be our partners and allies?
Well, you know, Rev, let's talk solutions for a second on this particular area. And sometimes people think, well, it's so difficult to be able to change these dynamics. There are some simple steps that you can do to show that you are trying to create 21st century organizations and 21st century funding streams. So let's use billionaires as an example. You know, I don't know any, and I've only engaged with a few of the billionaires that have environmental justice individuals who are in their leadership positions in their respective organizations. So that leaves a gap. And all the folks who have made billions that I know of have done it, you know, in many instances because of hard work. You know, some of it dollars came down over the years from others, but many of them are very astute at business practices. Let me say it that way. So it would just make sense that if you want to be an effective ally in the climate and environmental justice space, that you would have individuals with that expertise who are in your senior leadership team to help to guide you and to make sure that you know you're making decisions based on knowledge and facts and relationships. So that's one very easy place that they could start to make sure they're building bridges to you know to our organizations and our communities.
Absolutely. And also with the funding, let's go back to in terms of investing. So, you know, we sit in meetings and of course we speak truth to power. But sometimes sitting in some meetings get rather frustrating. It's like, you know, how long are we going to discuss what a just transition is? How long are we going to discuss how do certain organizations, how can they partner with frontline communities? How can they partner with the faith community? And it's like an endless discussion where the conversations always terminate with someone saying, when are we going to meet again to continue talking again? We're literally at a place right now on this entire planet where we must move towards implementation. And so all the conversations in the world, all the summits, all the webinars, all the strategic plans, all of the mapping, all of that stuff is meaningless if it doesn't all culminate in us actually putting together things on the ground where people have energy democracy, because we have people on the ground who are doing small scale solar, or you can do rooftop solar, or you can do community farms. Well, the piece that is missing is the implementation piece. And I don't know about you, but how much funding do we actually see in terms of people actually being funded to put together community-led solutions on the ground?
Well, we know that it's less than 1% of the total dollars that are flowing through the climate and environmental space right now. You know, so
Mhm.
many folks love to have these theoretical conversations because then, you know, it just kind of drags everything out instead of making hard decisions that are based on, you know, conversations with folks, on the expertise from folks, and so forth and so on. It's almost like when we say that the sky is blue, and then people want to talk about the 47 shades of blue that it might be, instead of getting down to you know the reality of that is blue. It's just
Mhm.
like we know that in our communities that folks are getting sick and folks are dying. We know that in our communities is primarily where the fossil fuel facilities are located, and it's playing a role in warming up the oceans and warming up our planet. You know, we know that there has been significant disinvestment that has happened in African American, Latinx, and Indigenous and Asian and Pacific Islander communities. So we know these things. And we also know that there are antidotes to deal with the injustices and the racism that has existed. And a part of that is making sure that we are properly funding the organizations that are doing the work and that also have examples, right, that can be duplicated in many communities across our country of how change can happen. That can
Mhm.
be the examples in Spartanburg, South Carolina with the Regenesis Project. That can be examples in Florence, South Carolina with the solar work that you guys have been doing. That could be with Miss Margaret May in Kansas City and the Ivanhoe community. That could be the work of Diane Takvorian and the Environmental Health Coalition in San Diego. If that could be in the faith-based context with the work of Reverend Floyd Flake up in Jamaica, Queens, or Reverend Buster Soras in Jersey City, or the work of New Bethel in Chicago. The examples are there that have been led by communities, making real change happen, often with limited resources. Imagine the change we could make if we actually finally funded organizations at the level that we do other organizations who haven't been able to have those levels of success.
Mhm. Absolutely. And what what we found is that when you go to communities, when you talk to communities, when you talk with organizations that have both experience and expertise, when you talk with them, they don't have a problem. They don't have the same sort of problem sitting down and having to meet endlessly to try to figure out A, what the problem is, and B, what the solution is. People in the community can tell you really quickly the reason why our community is flooding more and more is not only because of the impacts of climate change, but also because we have excessive logging. Also because the ditches haven't been cleaned out. Also because while they may be talking about erecting seawalls for tourism, for areas where tourists come. They may, be looking at putting a seawall on Meeting Street in downtown Charleston, which is a area that gets a lot of tourism and a lot of dollars in. And the people in the community are saying, why can't we have an earthen dam over here? Why can't we have a levee here? Those sorts of things. So even when we talk about the philanthropic community, and we talk about the fact that with the larger environmental and conservation organization, that we still don't have environmental justice leaders sitting in the seats where decisions are made. And on the corporate level, as corporations state more and more often that they want to do something that will help us deal with the climate crisis, we don't see people of color who are environmental leaders. We don't see them on their boards. We don't see them in decision-making positions. And even with the federal government, even with the Biden administration, with the many wonderful appointments that have been made, how many of those appointments are people who have actually done the work on the ground, actually lived in those communities, and are keenly aware of what some of the solutions should be?
Yeah. I often talk about the infrastructure inside of the infrastructure. And what that means is that just like in the Wizard of Oz, when you pull back that curtain, you get to see what's really going on. So whether we're talking about corporations, and what are your priorities, right? And has environmental justice been one of those priorities that's in it? Because we know priorities are tied to resources. And then, of course, we then look, as you said, at the boards, at your senior managers and your senior leadership and your middle managers. And if we don't see folks who have those competencies who come from that work, then that pretty much shares with us that you have a long way to go on your journey. And then the same thing, inside the federal government, 40% of the country is African American, is Latinx, is Indigenous, and Asian and Pacific Islander. So if your government doesn't look like that, then you got more work to do. If your grants and contracts and subcontracts, if 40% of those are not going to African Americans, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian and Pacific Islander, then we got a problem. And we know that in our current structure, and of course, we have a new administration that's not yet 100 days in. If by the time we get to 2 or 3 years in, and if 40% of the resources that are flowing from the federal government are not going to those communities, then we have missed the mark. So you've got to go out and make sure that you're getting the right folks. And then you've got to make sure that we're also building real accountability. So the question becomes, Rev, if a corporation doesn't have, the structures in place and doesn't hire the people, what's the accountability? What are folks willing to do? Are you willing to take your dollars away from that corporation? And if you're not, then you're losing the ability to actually influence change. If your federal government, your state government, your county or local government is not reflective of what the country looks like, then what are you willing to do to actually address that? And hopefully we can get people, because it is the right thing to do and because there is an evolution that's happening in our country, to move in that direction. But if folks do not, the question becomes, what are you willing to do?
Right. If companies, if government does not reflect what the actual population looks like, then on the government level, we're not talking about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's impossible to have those three things, which we lift up as the basic pillars of democracy. It's impossible to have that if you have one segment of people who make up the majority of the decisions and decide who resources, who the resources, what communities the resources go to. That is absolutely impossible to happen. So as we move forward, also, I look at certain parts of the country, and you know, there is not a part of the country, there is not a single place on the planet that is not experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis. However, we know that as the planet heats up, that along the equator in the southern part of the planet, the southern hemispheres, are the ones that right now are being impacted the most by climate change. And so if we are not willing to address the issues where the impacts are the greatest, if we're not willing to look at implementation in the places where it will be the hardest to deal with the problems, then what are we going to be able to do in other places? You know, this is really where we find out what the tried and true solutions are, even though they look different in different places. And in this case, I have to lift up the South, the southern part of the United States of America. As I often say, the South is experiencing more climate impacts than any other region in the country. Sea level rise, hurricanes, tornadoes, torrential rains, excessive heat, as we see in Texas, snow and cold. And, you know, we can just go on, inland flooding, et cetera, you know. But if we are not willing to go into these under-resourced states, under-resourced communities, under-resourced regions that are being impacted the most, then how are we going to deal with other regions? And I don't want to say that these areas are like test grounds for what might be possible solutions, but if we don't address the issues in these areas, then they definitely will become sacrifice zones.
I mean, without a doubt. And unfortunately, they have been the canaries in the coal mine for a while. Look at Princeville, North Carolina, founded by freed slaves and hit time and time again with biblical floods. So we know what the impacts are to the communities. But we also know there are folks like Derek Evans and the good folks down in Turkey Creek, Mississippi, you know, who have also been working to make sure that, you know, their streams and riverbanks are taken care of so that they become less flooded. And also many of the other things that they've been doing with national historic preservation and protecting, the various things that have been built since folks got there after slavery was over. And there are examples all across the South of how people are adapting, becoming more resilient, and all these other words that we use, but it's really about people trying to protect their lives and their livelihood and their culture, right? Because when we allow these things to happen time and time and time again, we erode culture. And look at the brothers and sisters, in the islands off of South Carolina and Florida and Georgia, the Gullah Geechee brothers and sisters, who held on to African culture, right? escaping from slavery, and then others coming over and building thriving communities. And now, because of rising sea levels, because of encroachment from those who didn't see value in the land before, but now do, we have to make the investments in people and protecting culture at the same time. So my grandmother says, when you know better, do better. It would be
Mhm.
different if we were not in a moment where we didn't know how to do better. We do. So now is the time to actually implement that innovation and ingenuity and the brain power that we have, and link it up with the resources to actually protect folks and protect our country and protect our planet.
And everything is so intersectional. So, we talk about how to make communities more resilient. We talk about ways that we can mitigate the impacts of climate change. But then there's also, adaptation.
Mhm.
That there are going to be some things that we just can't do anything about, and how we can adapt, and in ways where we're moving communities from surviving to thriving, where we're creating entrepreneurial opportunities. We're looking at one community where we say, okay, can we, with the resources, can we put drainage systems in place, and also have retaining ponds that we can stock with fish, and then create some businesses, also have creating a food sovereignty and food systems where that community can feed itself as well. And so a lot of these solutions can be adapted in that way, and particularly where we are now. And you've heard me talk about before that I say we must usher in an era of the iron will, where it's all about implementation and us being resolute, not being bought off by the $20,000 or $50,000 grant that we know doesn't really address the needs of our community. It's about us being original. It's about us taking novel approaches, because we don't know when this is going to happen again. First Earth Day, 1971. 50 years later, are we going to miss the opportunities that may be available to us because wealthy individuals are not now giving around environmental justice and the climate crisis? Because finally we're on the radar of the federal government, and they're talking about allocating resources.
Mhm.
So we must stand resolutely. And I'm talking to our brothers and sisters on the ground who are doing the work. We must be like a tree planted by the water. We say in our faith tradition, we shall not be moved. We need solutions. We are facing death. We're facing injuries, loss of property, loss of culture because of climate impact. We've lost so many lives. So many jobs have been lost that are not going to come back because of the pandemic. Racial injustice is running rampant. People are becoming accustomed to hearing about yet another police shooting. And the health disparities, all of these things are still in place. And we are losing people at a historically record number that I don't believe has happened in this country since the time of slavery, when our lives were deemed legally of no value. And so looking at all the things that are impacting our communities right now, we must, those of us who know, we just have to speak truth to power. We can't back down. We don't know when this historical moment may happen again.
Yeah. Well, we're on the precipice of change, as a great man once said. And this is a transformational moment. The question is, in this moment, are we supportive of African American communities and Latinx communities and indigenous communities and Asian and Pacific Islander communities and lower wealth white communities, actually having the opportunity to build power, to build wealth, to build influence, to bring back hope to their communities? And if the answer is yes, then that means that we know the steps that we need to do. And if
Mhm.
the answer is yes, then we deserve to be in a 21st century moment where we can actually dismantle, many of the obstacles and the sins of the past. So we're at that moment, and the question is our foundations, is the federal government, our corporations, and those who have been blessed with huge amounts of wealth willing to step into that space and do the right thing.
Mhm.
You know me. I'm an optimist to a degree. I'm also a realist, I guess, as I get a little bit older. That sometimes folks got to be nudged to do the right thing. So I'm hopeful that we are now at the time when we realize that by making sure that we are supporting, our most vulnerable communities, that at the same time we are literally saving our own lives
Mhm.
and saving our planet.
Right, absolutely. And you mentioned a nudge. And so we have for people of color and people who live in low wealth communities, we don't have a lot of tools that we can employ to make change. One is our vote. That is one. And we know that that's under siege with the 47 states that have all put forth legislation that in actuality will suppress our votes. And the other that is simply our dollars.
Mhm.
And so, you know, we need to, or should we really be considering having a discussion that's going to lead towards action and implementation, perhaps when we don't see corporations moving in the right direction, making sure that our dollars move in another direction and not in their direction. And I really think that that's a serious conversation that needs to take place. That not only when we talk about extractive industries, extractive companies, we're not just talking about those who are in the fossil fuel industry, those who cut down trees for biomass wood pellet plant, but also we're talking about companies that extract wealth from our communities, who extract our consumer dollars out of our communities, but are investing nothing back or very little of any significance or very little that will really bring about the changes that we need in the 21st century. So perhaps that's a discussion we need to talk about.
It is, it is a master's class, and there are a number of frontline leaders who give master classes all the time. We got to make sure that they have the platforms to help our country to move in the right direction and to continue to evolve and grow. You highlighted the fact that, that we have our vote and that we have our dollars. And I would just add to that set of tools that we have that we have
Mhm.
these phones, that every time you watch a news TV show, right? Doesn't matter. And I got friends at MSNBC and CNN and a whole bunch of the other, and ABC and CBS and NBC, so I don't forget anybody. When they have conversations and you don't see an environmental justice leader or somebody who has the competencies that you feel are necessary, then we should be reaching out to them and saying, wait a minute, no, this is unacceptable. You have legal professionals on when we have legal conversations. When there's an attack someplace, we'll have someone from the military on, or we'll have, somebody who comes from law enforcement or something else. When we're having conversations around climate, community redevelopment, the environment, so many of these other issues that are tied to environmental justice, then we should let them know that it is unacceptable. When there are newspapers that still don't tell our stories, or magazines, then we should also be calling them out. And that goes back to one of the points that you raised, Rev, of how we utilize our dollars. So the conversation just isn't, well, you didn't have XYZ as a part of the conversation, but that I will also be letting the folks who are putting the commercials on before and after to know that I don't appreciate the lack of coverage and transparency from the prism that we work from.
Especially if that advertiser, that company is providing financial support to a media outlet that is not covering the issues that are impacting us, the issues that are in our community. If that we should talk to the media and say to that newspaper, that news station, we should say to them, you need to cover. But then again, we should also look at the companies that are spending advertising dollars with them. And if we have approached them and said to them, hey, you need to have expertise on your board. You need to have management and executive people who know what the problems are and are going to help your corporation do things to help the community to plan it and to develop revenue streams for themselves. When we see those two things coming together, then we need to say, turn the dial and don't buy that product.
Yeah. You know, there's an old adage, Rev, that says you have power unless you give it away. We have to stop giving our power away, stop giving our dollars away, and stop giving our votes away as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And voting is, we're starting to see different people. We're starting to see people who come from different types of experiences, who seem to be more knowledgeable about climate and the things that we need to be doing. And one of the things, when I don't care if we're talking about Democratic Party, Republican Party, Party of the Future, that these new voices that are coming to the public square via our governing entities, that these new voices should not be shamed, they should not be put down, they should not be minimized, because there are communities and there are people who have elected them because they feel that they represent those communities and are speaking to some of the community's needs. And so that's something too that I believe that we should not be demonizing the new voices that are arriving in the political sphere. And communities, I believe, are becoming more and more aware of the fact that voting for people should not be just a matter of voting for the lesser evil or voting for the a person who has the most pleasing personality, as they say, the person I'd like to have a beer with. No, we need political representation that that resonate with us a little more deeper than that.
Well, Rev, when you said party of the future, I thought we was about to start talking about George Clinton and some funkadelic stuff that was about to come off. But you know, you're exactly right. And another part of the equation is making sure that we are working effectively with creatives, those who are in, you know, the arts space, and one, making sure that they know that they're welcomed and honored, and that they have a responsibility. They have a responsibility, and we've seen many begin to step up. So I don't want to by any means shrink, you know, the great work that a number of artists and entertainers are doing, but we need more, and we need to also make sure that they are connected to frontline communities and others who are authentic in this work, so that they don't get co-opted by folks who might have a bit more resources to attract you, but have not been, you know, authentic collaborative partnerships with frontline organizations and others.
Mhm. Absolutely. So we have new people who are stepping up, who are creative and who are using their creativity to address issues in our community. And then we also need to look at, some of our already established artists, people who have already made it, people who have those recording contracts, who are acting, in the movie industry. And we need to make sure that they are connecting directly with the community. We need more things like farm aid. You know, we need these people who have visibility, who have huge fan bases, who are influencers, to not just do things through with the usual suspects or wait until there's a climate impact, a catastrophe, but they need to be connected to the groups on the ground so that the voices and the needs and the cries of the community are heard in the lyrics and the sultry songs that these very, very talented people go into recording studios and go into movie studios to create great works of art all the time.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And in that same vein, we began to hopefully work with folks like, I'm just gonna call them out because I love them. Ava DuVernay, and Issa Rae, and many of these other just incredible, incredible artists and creators to begin to weave our content into that storytelling that's going on. Is another opportunity that we have to really educate folks and to hold folks accountable also. So this is an amazing moment that we find ourselves in. We still got some challenges because there are capacity issues that I feel folks need to pay much more attention to, especially as huge amounts of resources are going to be flowing and making sure they're actually making it to the places that need them the most and the organizations that do. But when we look in the broader context, we're blessed to be in this moment. I think about all the incredible early leaders in the environmental justice movement: Hazel Johnson, Dana Alston, Gene Sindab. And we can go all the way down the list of folks who gave their lives.
Connie Tucker.
Connie Tucker, Damu Smith, my mentor, and many others. I hope that the ancestors on the other side are looking down, and I'm sure they're smiling sometimes, and other times saying, wow, this is still going on all these years later. But there are so many folks who won't give up the fight until we win.
That's right. The iron will. Mm-hmm. And I'm just hoping, not because I'm saying that, but that is something that will catch on amongst us, just like moving from surviving to thriving. We have to have these themes that just unite us. And right now, it's all about an iron will, just saying whatever you want to allocate is not enough. And then I'm also looking at why can we not have not only national funding, but in some cases regional funding? Mm-hmm. And even if we have to get several, and it's not necessary where we have to get several funders to do large scale regional funding, say, because there's enough, what is there, billions of dollars out there in the philanthropic community. But just imagine, and I'm just going to pick the South because that's where we do a lot of work. Let's just imagine if we just said, for groups on the ground, frontline communities, environmental justice organizations, we're going to put $5 million into each of the southeastern states. $5 million, 12 states, only $60 million. Mm-hmm. And we're going to do that for, let's say, 5 years. And I don't have to say do, I don't even know why I'm saying do. You can imagine the tremendous amount of work that would be done and what could be accomplished if we just said, we're going to put $5 million. That is not a lot of money for an entire state. $5 million we're going to give to groups on the ground for 5 years. Because when we look at some of the amazing examples that you've shared with us, wow, we would be able to do what, 5, 10, 20 times more? Mm-hmm. Have how many more successes and accomplishments? So that's the other thing that's been on my mind quite a bit. Why can't we have these many, many funders, many, many foundations people of great wealth just say, hey, if you can give someone $500 million, if you can give an organization, $1 billion, among 2 or 3 organizations, what could we do with groups on the ground with that amount of money?
We could be transformational. It's really that simple. And I'm one for pushing the numbers because we often, because we're used to doing so much good with so little resources that we underfund our dreams or things that are not even dreams, things that are actualities. So I'm one who says if we can give hundreds of billions of dollars in benefits and tax breaks and subsidies to fossil fuel corporations and others, then it's time for us to redirect the resources to organizations who are trying to and are doing good.
Mhm.
So I'm one who believes that hundreds of millions of dollars should be going to those regional initiatives because when you start to actually see how much it costs to get stuff done, then you don't you want to make sure that you have what's necessary not just in the moment but for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I'm pushing and I'm calling for folks that when we see $2 trillion for the climate, we should be asking for more than that. Because if, I worked on Capitol Hill, I've spent enough time in Washington to know that numbers shrink, after everybody sort of gathers around the table and starts to say, well, this is not necessary and this is. So, we have to stop lowering our expectations about what funding should look like. So I just encourage folks to think more critically about what the real need is and how much good can come from that.
Right. And if we're not funding yet another webinar, yet another summit, not yet more mapping, but I'm not saying don't fund those things, but if we're doing it in a way where we're creating investments in communities. So funders need to look at their metrics differently also, not just numbers, not how many people did you connect to online, but looking at it and say, we're going to fund you for putting together a strategic plan or whatever. But at the end of the funding period, we want to see something tangible on the ground that's been implemented. We want to see some off-grid solar projects. We want to be able to see some outdoor recreation. We want to be able to see people who have been trained for jobs and are employed in industries that they weren't employed in before. We just did the ribbon cutting today on our solar powered hydro panels, and the fellow Scott spoke who installed them is, you look at us putting this project together so that we can move towards having a just transition. And then the person who's doing the installation, Scott, is a former miner who worked in the mines of Kentucky for 22 years. And when the mines shut down in his community, he went and learned how to do solar. He went and learned how to do energy efficiency, how to install these hydro panels, etc. And you just look at here's someone who came from a low wealth, or middle class community, in a community where they've had massive pollution and massive death for Black lung, etc., working alongside people of color, African Americans, who are also trying to create a just transition in their community. We have the people, we have the knowledge, we have the experience. We're just in the resources.
Right. We have the opportunity to bring all kinds of folks together.
Things that lead to actual implementation and not more talk.
Yeah. I mean, we have the opportunity to bring folks together, all kinds of folks who sometimes didn't see themselves working together. And sometimes we're looking for an opportunity to work together. And that has to be a part of the narrative that we're sharing with folks. We talk about a just transition. We're not talking about anybody getting left behind. We're actually talking about picking folks up and making sure that folks who have often been unseen and unheard and unwelcomed, that they are also right there at the front of the line for these new sets of opportunities. And that's a part of our job, is to make sure that we are framing the narrative properly, because those who have been a part of the pain and the trauma and the pollution are going to do everything that they can to slow the process down. It's like cigarettes, where for years, first they said, well, it doesn't cause cancer, then it might cause cancer, and then, well, if you do this, you might not get cancer. All the time knowing what the ultimate outcome was going to be. And you still have industries that follow that old playbook. We have the opportunity to rewrite the playbook, to rewrite the narrative, and to let folks know that everyone is welcomed, everyone is needed, and that we can make change happen that makes sure that everyone not just has a seat at the table, but are also framing out that new direction.
Absolutely. And so we've been on here for a while, and we're going to share this out with folks. And I'm so thank you, Mustafa, for doing this. And we're going to do some more of this. And I'm smiling because what folks don't realize is that these are the kind of conversations that the two of us have, that we have with others over the telephone. And when we get an opportunity to see each other, which is very few now with the pandemic. But, let's share these kinds of conversations more often with the folks that we work with the folks who'll be viewing this. And so I'm going to stop right here because, I love you, brother. And I know you did a tremendous amount of work today, and you need to get some rest. And we've been in here since this morning, working on our stuff, and we need everybody. But great ideas. We're going to post it. We're going to share the link with you so that you can post it, and then we want to get feedback from folks. Don't you agree?
Yes, most definitely. It takes all the voices and different ideas, and us coming together and focusing on our commonalities, and then the differences, we can circle back around on those. But we're running out of time. Let's get it done, and we can get it done. We just have to make the decision that we will get it done.
Absolutely. And I'll close saying this, being completely nonpartisan, not rooting for or not putting down any party, but we know that elections mean changes. And so the midterm elections are coming up. And that means that we have not only are we running out of time in terms of us reducing carbon emissions and implementing things that will help us to reduce the ferocity and the longevity of climate impacts. But we're also running out of time because we have less than 2 years to a midterm election. And we know that changes in election, changes in administrations, as we've seen recently, can mean a complete and total reversal in terms of policy and allocation of resources. So we need to usher in the era of the iron will. We need to stand strong, and we need to push for the changes that we need today, not tomorrow, not 2030, but today. And if we can do that, then I know that we'll be heralding not only an era of the iron will, but we'll be heralding in an era where we really start to see true transformation that'll make this planet and communities and family and people truly able to say that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is an everyday reality for us all.
Amen.
Amen. So, my brother, I'll see you get some rest, because we know, though my wife hates it, and I don't know how your wife feels, but we know that the battle never ends, and we'll be doing something again tomorrow, even though it's the weekend, right?
I hear you.
All right. All right. So take care. Peace out, brother. Love you.
All right, love too.
Bye now.